I've never had a friend quite like you before, Lena, and I never will again. This was said by Cara Danvers to Lena Luthor in the 2015 Supergirl TV show. Now, this isn't a completely unconventional thing to say to your friend, but in the context of that she just bought you a room full of flowers, this can be seen as romantic to some people. The refusal of the CW network to explore the romantic potential between Kara and Lena in the 2015 Supergirl TV show is an example of queerbaiting, ignoring the evident chemistry, paralleling them and writing scenes of them acting like a couple, and even paralleling them to other couples like Clark Kent and Lois Lane. This decision reflects a broader trend in media where authentic representation is sacrificed in the sake of maintaining heteronormative narratives, and queer people are fed up of being profited off of without actual representation being given to them. Now I want to talk about Supercorp, and Supercorp basically is the name that the fandom has given Kara / Supergirl and Lena's relationship. It's basically a mashup of their names, Super, like Supergirl, and Corp, Luthor Corp, which is Lena's company. Before I get into it, I want to talk about queer baiting versus queer subtext. Televised Podcast is a YouTuber that talks about Supercorp, and she goes into the difference between queer baiting and queer subtext. She says, queer baiting is using queerness purposely to promote a show or keep viewers engaged, but never actually delivering. An example she used is Chloe and Becca in Pitch Perfect 3 in the marketing and how that was used. Then she goes on and says queer subtext is using subtext to imply queerness without explicitly conforming the characters to queerness. It explores queerness in a neutral way, mainly when queerness would not be accepted otherwise. An example she gave was Luca as a gay allegory. Now moving on, I want to talk about Supergirl and Lena and the chemistry they had in the early seasons. In the early seasons, Lena and Kara were always hitting on each other, and I don't think this was written on as purposefully in the earlier seasons, but they were hitting on each other. They had a lot of chemistry together. The showrunners ended up writing Lena Luthor as a main character. She was originally only supposed to be a guest star for a few episodes, but they wrote her on as a main character because of how much chemistry they had together. And they mean a lot to each other. Their relationships ends up becoming one of the most important relationships in the TV show. They relate to each other a lot, always wanting the greater goodness and always feeling like they need to prove themselves as good and not harmful to humanity. Mainly Lena, because of her relationship with her brother Lex. She doesn't want to be seen as an evil Lex Luthor. She wants to be seen as a good Lena Luthor and separating her name from Lex Luthor. And with Supergirl always wanting to prove to humanity that she's good even though she's an alien. Now, people often say that if Supergirl was a man, they would basically just be Clark Kent and Lois Lane, and I agree with this. Both Clark Kent and Lois Lane and Supergirl and Lena have a lot of stuff in common. Both Lena and Lois had an impact on Kara and Clark getting into the journalistic field. They both, Clark and Supergirl had to keep their identity from Lena and Lois, which built a lot of tension in the relationship. They both had to grapple with telling Lena and Lois about their true identity and the fear of being rejected because of their true identity. And overall, the way the scenes were shot in the Supergirl TV show was almost a mirror image of the exact scenes that were shot with Clark Kent and Lois Lane, and I'll put up examples here to show that. Now, I also want to talk about how the show went from being a lot of queer subtext and Kara relating her identity as Supergirl and having to hide that, with her sister's identity as a lesbian having to hide that at first. And that was good subtext, and it was a great example to use in the show. And a lot of the chemistry and flirtiness that she and Lena had was really good too, and I don't think it was on purpose at first. But then the writers of the show sort of started teetering on the line between queer subtext and queer bait, and it started leaning into queer bait. A YouTuber, Alexander Evalda, talks about this a lot too. He talks about how the showrunners should have handled it like the Once Upon a Time showrunners did. He talks about how, if you don't know, basically a lot of people wanted Emma Swan and Regina Mills to be in a relationship together, but the showrunners blatantly said, no, they're not going to be in a relationship, which is okay. Just because you want two people to be together in a show doesn't mean they have to be together. But this is what CW should have done. They should have said, if if the higher-ups said that they couldn't be in a relationship, if the writers said they couldn't be in a relationship, whatever, they should have explicitly told fans that they aren't going to be in a relationship. Instead, they leaned in to the romantic potential and the queer baitness and basically tricked people and gave people's hopes up, and that's when it started to become a problem, because they never explicitly said that they wouldn't be in a relationship, and instead wrote more romantic scenes together between Cara and Lena. Talking about the romantic scenes, they started purposely writing scenes with romantic music over it, and Cara and Lena, like, got into a fight, and their whole, like, breakup scene was them looking at pictures of each other, longing for each other, while they were fighting. And a great example that Abnormally Adam, a YouTuber who talks about Supercorp a lot, brings up was the 100th episode of Supergirl, which entirely surrounded Cara and Lena's relationship, and Cara being desperate to get Lena back and have their relationship be right again. She even goes through different dimensions in time to try to get her back. And so yeah, that's a great example, and they really started to lean into the marketing of Cara and Lena's relationship. And this is when I'm going to talk about fandom and mainstream media, because a lot of the fandom that was interacting with Supergirl was mainly Supercorp shippers who wanted Cara and Lena to be together. And even the mainstream media started picking up on this. I mean, there's articles written about them. One article would be Gay Culture or Girl Culture wrote an article about them, talking about if they're going to become a couple, and if they're not, like, how big of a queer bait this has become, and everything like that. Like, there's multiple articles written about them. So my final thoughts on the situation: I think they should have been together in the TV show, and this has had a really big impact on a lot of people, and a lot of people still talk about them to this day. Although this is a very evident example of queer baiting, and is an example of queer baiting people use when talking about queer bait. But overall, I think they should have been together. Even in the DC comics, they're together, and Kara's pansexual, and in the newest one, she's with Lena Luthor. So I think they clearly have that chemistry, and they're clearly written sort of as a couple. Lastly, I want to talk about my Works Cited page. Alexander Avalda does a YouTube series, Are They Gay?, and talks about different characters and does a deep dive into if these characters can be seen as gay or not. He provided a big deep dive into Supercorp. Murphy Colleen wrote an article about why queerbaiting and marketing and media is harmful and how we can stop it. She has a lot of validity. She writes for the Health Organization for LGBTQ Youth. I use the example of girl culture as one of the articles written about Supercorp. I added in the comic where Supergirl and Lena Luthor are together as one of my works cited. The last two I have is Televised Podcast. She provided a lot of my definitions of queerbaiting versus queer subtext. And lastly, Abnormally Adam has been following Supercorp and the Supergirl TV show for a long time, so he has a lot of validity among the community. And his YouTube video does a really good deep dive into his final thoughts of the show.
So my office is overflowing with flowers.
Really?
Yeah. You didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I did. Supergirl told me that it was you who sent her. I don't know how to thank you.
Well, that's what friends are for.
You know, never had friends like you before. Come to think of it, I've never had family like you. No one's ever stood up for me like that.
Now you have someone that will stand up for you, always.
Well, Supergirl may have saved me, but Cara Danvers, you are my hero.
Thank you. Anytime. Bye.